Welcome to the latest edition of Sense of Identity. As always, what we try and do on these sessions is bring colleagues, friends from the industry to come and talk to us about interesting things they're doing that we believe will impact and be of interest to our audiences. So I'm really delighted today actually to be joined by both Garry Evans, who's the Chief Commercial and Product Officer, and Adrian Crean, Strategic Partnerships Director, get that right, for TCC Group. Thanks for joining us, gents.
Thank you for having us.
This is all about TCC Group, not about us. Obviously, there's some common areas around risk and things, but there's a few words I'm just going to say to try and best articulate TCC. And then ideally, if it's okay, I'll fire a few questions and we'll demystify anything that I don't get right. But fundamentally, the business has a lot of experience in AI-driven RegTech, combining regulatory compliance expertise, and obviously very interestingly with advanced AI, speech and document content analytics. And obviously the AI connection there for you, like us, goes back a long way. So it's not just a fashionable word, you're living the dream. We're going to talk a little bit later just to wet people's whistles about how the Apple Siri, there's a connection there, which we'll touch on very briefly. But you can imagine those sorts of technologies help TCC partner with some really interesting, well-known regulated firms. As I said, the touch point here is about risk, addressing persisting risks in a business, given that the group helps enterprises sort of prioritize conduct risk, but also to help identify high-risk cases, which is an interesting and difficult thing, particularly from my perspective, when you start chatting about call recording and, and therefore the intelligence you've got to overlay on that. So I'm really hoping this is going to be an eye-opener for people to understand the art of the possible, if possible. So perhaps if I just firstly start, Adrian, I've probably done a really poor job of explaining TCC. Do you mind giving us a little bit of an intro and backdrop and background in your words rather than mine, if that's okay?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Garry, please jump in. Yeah, I think your introduction was spot on, Paul. I think one of the things that makes us a little bit different in the market is within the same group, if you like, we have a market-leading consulting, resourcing, managed service business in and around compliance. And in the same stable, we've got an AI-led RegTech business as well. So it means we're always at the forefront of regulation, and we can inform how our technology is built and developed by having a real insight into the regulation in various markets and how they're playing out. But yeah, so TCC Group, you mentioned TCC has been around for quite some time now as a market-leading consultancy. And then about 15 years ago, born out of a recognition that technology has a much bigger role to play in and around risk and compliance, Recordsure was formed. Our CTO kit remains at the forefront of the business. Having founded the business, Joanne Smith founded TCC, is also the chair and owner of the business. So we've had a lot of continuity there. And then more recently, we acquired a business called Momenta, which adds another arm to our group, which essentially is a resourcing business that has got international presence as well. So yeah, absolutely. And interestingly, the challenge we set ourselves 14 years ago still remains a challenge in the market today, which is, technology has moved on dramatically, but there's still a huge role for AI to play. We're only really at the tipping point of the opportunity.
And I guess from our earlier discussions, the bit for me that I'd never really probably understood how big corporates deal with in the context of this legacy of like call recordings as a starter point. I appreciate it goes way beyond that, but the sort of latest evolutions in technology and that speech recognition and translation and et cetera, from what I gather, helps you help your customers look back on those books of business and those discussions, which are really important, and help vet, interrogate, understand, prioritize. So where do you see that technology plays, its part in some of those challenges for those businesses? Because they've all got call centers, they're all speaking to lots of customers. It's actually almost the preferred, contact mechanism in a way, actually speaking to customers. Wow, these days. How do you deal with that? And what does your tech add into that? That mix, Garry.
We talked about AI. AI is at the core of everything we do. So from a conversation analytics perspective, we use it to identify whether specific required topics have been covered in conversations and to enable us to focus down on specific areas of conversation without having to speak at all. So from an efficiency perspective, you have, if a human has to review a conversation, then listening to it from end to end typically takes twice as long as the actual conversation lasted. But if you can utilize AI to pinpoint the areas of interest within that conversation, you can take out 70% of that time. That 70% of the time that you're taking out bleeds straight through into the efficiency of people. So if you needed 10 people before to cover these conversations, you now need 3, or you can cover 3.5 times as many conversations as you did before.
I'm guessing that, some of these banks of voice files must be effectively, years long, mustn't they? So there can be no other way of dealing with it, surely. It must be impractical to deal with it any other way.
I think this is the kind of interesting part with some of these use cases. So you look at them, and even if you're not looking kind of retrospectively, even if you're just doing it on a business as usual basis, you could have kind of 100,000 hours of conversations per month. And I was talking to one of the retail banks, maybe kind of 6 months to a year ago. And I was talking to the head of compliance, and he said that they do approximately 1 to 2% of sampling of their conversations, and then they analyze them. And he said, last month, I identified 3 calls that had the same problem with them. So I went to the head of mortgages and said, look, I think we've got a theme here. We need to have a look at these, go broader with it, and then do some retraining. To which the kind of head of mortgages said, I did 100,000 hours of calls last month. You're showing me 3. I'm not interested. And so that whole piece of how do you get to a point of meaningful statistical significance on insights of what's going on in conversations, you can't do that with people. When you have these huge use cases, you cannot possibly can't afford to have an army of compliance people and QAs listening to all these conversations. The only way you're able to get that is utilizing AI.
And the other one, and we didn't sort of talk about this before, but it sort of occurred to me that the regulatory regime in the UK tends to be somewhat retrospective. So it's a moving feast, isn't it? So one would imagine the tech you help your customers deploy, your tech, means that you can change that frame, that window
Completely.
at the topic. As I say, unfortunately, the regulator, with the greatest of respect, has a habit of suddenly going, well, what about this 5 years ago? Did you think about that? That must be impossible. So that must be a massive upside for the approach you guys employ.
It is completely. We have two kind of use cases of the technology. So the first one is around BAU, and we are able to kind of flex our models and change the things that we're looking for very quickly, so that if something changes, you go, from now on, we'll look for that then. If you introduce a new product that has a new bunch of kind of questions and elements you need to cover in a conversation, we can ensure that we cover for that. The other area is the retrospective. So go back and do remediations. So a lot of the history of Recordsure is in looking at a kind of big, chunky, retrospective batches of data, be they in conversations or in documents, and then applying AI rules to look for certain things that they didn't know they had to look for, other than have a human spend 3 hours reviewing a set of documentation from end to end. We can apply the AI at it. Certainly what we found in one of our big remediations in Australia, when they did the initial scoping of it, it was going to be a 250 FTE job for 6.5 years. What we ended up getting it done in was just over 12 months. So you're effectively going to take 80% of the grunt work out of the task, making it far more affordable, far more doable.
I'm going to say to Gary's point, even though those very large projects are very meaningful to us as a business, our guidance will always be, make sure you're doing this ongoing so there are no surprises. The ability to interrogate your data and your conversations and your documents, ongoing evidence that's the regulator, means you'll never be caught out. To your point, poor regulation changes. But if you've got a mechanism in place whereby you've got a good handle on what you're doing, then you're far better placed to deal with it, rather than having to reach back 10 years into the bowels of your data and documents trying to find something that's really hard to uncover.
If not impossible.
Absolutely.
And so part of the reason I was so keen to get you guys on here, I'm very grateful for you coming on, is because AI has become a really fashionable word. And I know when we first started, again, it's something we've been involved with for a long time, a lot longer than it's been fashionable. And you guys way beyond that. So real world actual implementation experience of where these tool sets, and I appreciate they've evolved and are becoming more and more powerful, I get that, but everything's moving so quickly, generative AI, impacting all these so many areas of the world, in fact, almost things you couldn't possibly imagine. What's your take on the topic in terms of, more recent key developments, milestones? Where are you seeing your experience of AI as it's grown up, becoming what it is that people superficially see today? But what do you think are the key developments that are noteworthy, perhaps for the audience here? That words of wisdom, really.
Sure. Well, so I guess you mentioned earlier on about our links to Apple, and it's all through our CTO Kit Ruperel, who was part of the original Stevie development team over 20 years ago. But we are proper steeped in kind of AI history as a business. And I guess that certainly over the last 3 to 5 years, I think the challenge when we talk about AI is that when people hear AI, what they actually think of is generative AI. I think of ChatGPT and all the other generative AI products that are out there. But AI is a far broader term, umbrella term that has a bunch of different techniques in it. As kind of Kit has trained me in kind of how he thinks of things. Of generative AI creates things, it's in the name. But predictive AI finds things. So kind of if you have a use case of identifying whether a particular thing has happened or extracting data from conversations to be used in decision making, then you don't want to utilize technology that creates stuff. So I think kind of there's this element of we've always been kind of a predictive AI house, and the advent of generative AI has always kind of overwhelmed and pushed predictive AI to the side, but it's a really important element that needs to be kind of utilized. Now, from a generative AI perspective, personally, I love it. From Perplexity to Claude to Zapier to Copilot, I think kind of the Gen AI has a huge role to play in making us better at our jobs, outside of all the kind of fun stuff you could do with booking holidays with agentic. And actually, I think agentic AI is still really in the early stages of utilized within kind of major organizations. And that's, I think, where the future will be focused. However, the piece that is missing is the foundation of good validated data. So Gen AI tools can find things and extract data on their own, but they've got no way of delivering a reliable confidence factor alongside those things it finds and extracts. So I don't think the penny is truly dropped on this one yet. Any organizations that are using Gen AI for those types of use cases should be manually validating every data point they get. Even if Gen AI was 95% accurate, and it's not even close to that, then you'd not be able to work out which of your data points are in the 95% and which are in the 5%. And so you actually have to validate everything. On the other hand, if you use predictive AI models to extract the data, then at those same accuracy levels, which predictive AI gets far closer to, you'd only validate the 5% of data points where the confidence factor is not sufficiently high.
Yeah.
So for me, the real future, I believe, is the collaboration of Gen AI with predictive AI. If you can create a really solid, validated data layer using predictive AI, then the agentic AI based on LLMs and generative AI tools are going to be far more accurate and deterministic.
Some implications, I guess, for how we talk to the market, engage with clients. The sort of the swath of Gen AI solutions that are out there, some of them incredibly impressive. And we've seen clients adopt solutions because they're nice and shiny, they're relatively easy to adopt, trying to solve problems in their business that unfortunately can only go so far with a Gen AI solution. So we've been working hard just to try and educate people on the differences Gary's just done, which is there are certain situations where product X is perfect for you. It's relatively cheap to adopt, crack on with it. But if you're trying to solve this problem over here, that's a little bit more sophisticated, requires that level of validation, you need something a bit more evolved and advanced. So we do find ourselves going back to clients who've bought something 12 months ago, it's not working for them, they're having to unravel it, and then we come in and help them put it right.
And there was another comment that came out of one of the other podcasts, that unfortunately AI lies or regurgitates lies. So it's almost becoming an enterprise blocker, that very problem you're describing. So most of what I guess I touch on in financial services is hell bent on trying to apply AI somewhere. But what's TCC's overall market? Because to be blunt, what you do there is no I guess geographical constraint, because a language, there's no sector constraint. Where do you find TCC and Recordsure and those various parts of your kit bag? What other sectors are you pulled into?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious one is, as you say, which has been the heritage of the business from day one, is financial services because of the regulatory environment that goes with it. And, certainly initially in retail banking, that was our real strong point. Over time, that's expanded quite a bit. Wealth management, as Gary touched on, is probably our fastest growing sector right now. Insurance, and sort of any environment really where there's been any sort of regulatory murmur or change that causes a bit of disruption. So the obvious one at the moment is motor finance that we're very active in, given a lot of institutions are trying to figure out their obligations under that one as well. But to your characterization, it doesn't end with financial services. So government is a growing sector for us as well, particularly where, as you'd imagine, across the vast scope of central government, there's a lot of interviewing that goes on, whether that be for asylum, for benefits, across many, many different use cases. So we're now lodged in a couple of the larger government departments, helping them capture, digitally record and store conversations. And that in itself doesn't sound like super sophisticated, but relative to where they were, it was a massive leap in their capability. But I think the really interesting thing for them is that really gives them the platform now to overlay more sophisticated tools that we can help with, as Gary's alluded to, even transcription, but then over and above that, some of the AI tooling that we can bring to bear. As you'd imagine with government, it's quite a slow burn because they want to make sure that obviously everything works perfectly before they adopt it, but it's definitely the journey we're on. And then internationally, Gary's talked about Australia. We've done quite a bit of work down there, and we're having a lot of conversations now with entities that have similar-ish regulatory environments. So Canada, New Zealand being obvious examples. They've got that sort of Commonwealth heritage. And typically in those countries, we see the regulations maybe lagging the UK a little bit, but hot on its heels. So some of the experiences we've had in the UK are easily transferable. In Canada, client-focused reforms, total cost reporting are things that are hitting wealth firms out there that we're able to help with. And we're even having conversations in the US, which is clearly a vast market littered with landmines. But we think there's some interesting things we can do there also.
I mean, we've seen in the last couple of days as well, some of the, there's some mega mergers continue in financial services in particular. So, this is a problem that affects all of them, I'm sure. It's always difficult whether you are or aren't allowed to name drop, but because I'm aware of specifically some of the names you power. One of them's involved with one of those mega mergers, as far as I know, without naming names. But are you able to give any other examples of where you've had direct impact? I mean, you gave a great one there early on, Garry, which is the perfect articulation, isn't it? Can you move a project which would otherwise take 6 years and a load of FTE commitment into something which is a fraction of that, I'm assuming a fraction of the cost, better delivery, probably more robust delivery, et cetera, et cetera. Have you got any other decent, tales you can tell?
So there's a good example in a kind of retail banking in the UK based on outcome testing, and we are limited with the kind of client names we're allowed to say. Unfortunately, I would love to be a bit more open than I'm allowed to be. But obviously, kind of historically, language has been a barrier for our service because we created our own transcription engine because the available transcription engines in the market simply weren't good enough. They weren't accurate enough to run our AI, so we did it ourselves. Now, over the last 3-4 years, organizations such as Microsoft have dramatically improved their transcription engines. And so rather than stick to our guns and go, we've built this and so we're going to use it, we've flipped to Microsoft as soon as they became better than our models. And as a result of that, we can now, for a retail bank that has a kind of multi-countries that it's involved in, Latin America, Spain, for example, then we are now able to do what we do in the UK and Canada and Australia and New Zealand in those places as well, because actually the transcription engines and models that we use are kind of available there. What we apply in any one country can be applied in others. I'll get back to the question you actually asked, which is what were the examples of what you've done. So in the UK, Consumer Duty has really driven the retail banks down to outcome testing. And so that is about reviewing all of the communications and contacts with a customer from the start of an initiation of a particular journey right the way to the end. What we have been able to do with one of our big retail bank clients is utilize our conversation analytics to drive efficiencies in that process. We talked earlier about the small sample sizes that these organizations can do and the fact that it doesn't drive enough insight or be able to give you a thematic understanding of what's going on. What we're enabling them to do is increase their sample size at the same time as dramatically decrease the number of people who are needed to deliver those. So we are using our predictive AI models to help them identify cases that have issues, and that prevents the human checkers having to spend 95% of their time on cases that are green. So kind of, it automatically reduces and triages the cases that they need to look at. And then utilizing our topic identification AI, we're allowing those human checkers to reduce the time they spend on each check by 70%. And so what that's delivering for our client then is a multi-million-pound annual resource saving at the same time as increasing their oversight and insight into their business. So that's kind of one good example of the predictive AI kind of really kind of coming to the fore. And I got another example actually around summary meeting notes. Summary meeting notes have become pretty much ubiquitous, and kind of the efficiency savings that are claimed by the generative AI companies who are producing them are massive. And there's lots of clients across multiple sectors have bought into those savings, but they're not realizing them. And as Adrian mentioned, a lot of them are either rolling back out to those implementations or just recognizing that the AI verification tax needs to be paid and that the bills, so that that'll nullify an awful lot of the efficiency savings that went into those ROI packs for their boards. What we've done is we have kind of integrated our predictive AI with the generative AI on a meeting note summary, rather than give it an hour and a half for the conversation and say, summarize that, and I want to kind of cover off these things, and then spend months tweaking the prompts and prompt engineering and trying to work for one particular conversation and then finally work for another. And the fact it's completely inconsistent, which is what the feedback that we're getting. What we've done is we say, if we use our predictive AI, we can identify all the topics in the conversation. We can then use Gen AI to summarize the topics that are important for each client. And that produces a very consistent, a very accurate, and a deterministic outcome. So the challenge, we've had a number of organizations. I've done this summary 3 times in this conversation, and it's come with 3 different answers. I said, well, yes, because that is fundamentally how Gen AI works. But with predictive AI, you get a different answer. So I think there's 2 examples there from the stuff that we do in the private sector. But maybe Adrian can kind of cover off some of the public sector stuff that we do as well.
Yeah. So absolutely. So as I alluded to, where we're working in the public sector, there's clearly government operates at huge scale, and there are a number of sensitive, very delicate conversations that need to be had with constituents across the UK. What was happening in a lot of places and continues to happen was use of some very sort of traditional basic recorders, lots of CDs being transported from A to B, very limited recording capabilities. So, for example, unable to even understand who was talking as for which part of a particular conversation. So, through the work we've done, we've been able to make that very consistent, very simple. So you've got a very strong digital recording. We use technology in the conversations that's very advanced. That means picking up different components of that conversation is very easy to do. And effectively, as well as therefore giving them that asset, they now have a vault of data that is really out there to be used and taken advantage of, which is really the next leg of the journey. And just to build on Gary's point, particularly around wealth, I guess when we're working with organizations, we clearly often focus on the quality of the compliance evidencing and outcomes. We focus on efficiency because, as Garry said, the technology can do a lot of the work that humans have traditionally done, but there's also a real value creation element to it. So if you take the independent financial advice sector today, it's quite a mature population. A significant proportion of that population intends to retire in the next 10 years, which leaves a gap in terms of providing advice. So by virtue of what we do, we can significantly increase the number of clients per IFA because they've got more tooling, there's less manual work required, less sort of operational validation. So the ability for an IFA to have 300 rather than 120 clients is a real game changer for them in terms of how they can create value.
I think that's a massive one. And with your strategic sort of partnering hat on a second, Adrian, I know we bumped into each other at the IntelliFlow conference. I know that they're not the only sort of organisation that you're working with around empowering IFAs with some of this, this really extraordinary game-changing efficiency tech. So that's fabulous to see that is, it's not just the world of massive enterprises, with the dynamics changing, which is really cool. Just slightly on that topic of the languages and the world's become a smaller and smaller place. It still feels like Australia's an awful long way away, but fundamentally, and again, coming back to those mergers and acquisitions and all that stuff, this sort of multi-jurisdiction piece, for us, that's a topic at a data level, which has been imperative to comply with the legal obligations and things. I think what you hinted at before was that with the evolution of your language understandings, Garry, those barriers have really been broken down. Is that to what extent is that covered within your kit bag? Is that still evolving for some of those organisations that are dealing with very expansive sort of estates as far as the languages are concerned.
Yes, so we haven't been pulled and dragged into different kind of different countries with different languages just yet, but it is a fundamental part of our kit bag now.
Yeah.
So before it would have been a massive barrier, but now it's a core capability of the way in which we do things. What I think is interesting then is the way in which we design our systems. We can apply different lenses to different conversations. If you had a conversation that kind of cross jurisdictions that you need to look at from two different kind of regulatory checklists then and kind of QA points, then actually you can apply the different lenses to look at it from both perspectives.
Yeah, and that again feels to me like an extremely topical point, because these businesses struggle with trying to think, well, what's right in that jurisdiction, or what, it fits within a different regime, even possibly a different regulator. That's a really interesting dynamic. And in the same context of that flexibility, the regulator has a habit, we've touched on this very early on, of changing the goalposts. How do you stay at the forefront of a changing agenda like that to help customers and that with that state of flux that, for me, we seem to permanently be in from a regulatory perspective?
That's a great question, and actually, I think it's an area where we have an inherent advantage as kind of Recordsure. If you think of a Recordsure as a tech business, we're different to many other tech businesses because of our very close affiliation to TCC Group. So the regulatory experts in TCC had a huge role to play when we defined our products at the very start of the business, and they kind of maintain this kind of eye over us, and kind of they provide the kind of horizon scanning of what's important to the industry, so that we're able to kind of keep our fingers really on the pulse of what's happening in regulation. Now, having said that, we have also AI enabled them. So be that with kind of website scanners, news alerts, all of which get summarized using AI and sent to the team in real time on Slack. Over the last 12 months, they have become far better placed to hear about what's happening sooner. But fundamentally, it's their kind of insight and expertise that we really need. So they're hearing more about what the FCA are doing and what different organizations are doing about the regulation, kind of in real time almost. But the AI can't replace that expertise and kind of insights that they're able to bring as well. Staying on top of the regulator is all about kind of how we integrate with those. And I guess the other thing is that Kit and our product development team are absolutely voracious consumers of new tech news. So they're always looking for better ways of delivering what we deliver. As a chief product officer, it is quite challenging sometimes to stop them just taking on the news.
Right now.
They go, let's just wait a little bit, at least for a while, because this bit could be 5% better. Great. So it's a very interested business in all things change.
Yeah, well, I think increasingly we're able to help clients with a blended sort of set of solutions. So we're not just a point technology provider, even though we do that an awful lot when people have identified they need a technology need and we help them develop that. But the combination of, we can help you assess the problem, build your framework, build your scorecard, build your capability. We can provide people in your business if you need them. We can do it as a managed service end to end, so we can help you control it. And we can bring some technology in to supplement that. It gives us a really nice sort of end to end proposition. So what we talked about motor finance before, and we carefully engineered a proposition that really, has all of that within it, including a workflow that runs right through. But if somebody wants to come and buy that as a complete wrapper, that's fantastic, but they may not need that. They may just need the tech. As Garry said, I think it gives us a nice advantage in the market. We don't see many, if any, who have got that sort of full suite of things they can offer.
Yeah. I mean, and that remediation space seems to be absolutely perfectly suited for what you do. I was going to ask a sort of closing question. I could talk actually with you guys for ages because it's fascinating. But I mean, I'm probably easier to say this than you. But I mean, my understanding, you did this first. You guys are amongst the first in this space to look at these subjects. You've actioned it, and actually with that AI hat on that you mentioned there as well, Garry, there is no replacement for knowledge and experience and understanding of where you go wrong based against what was an immature market. So I think in that context, it's got to be a fabulous, backdrop to when people are looking at trying to solve some of these problems. I always like to sort of round these things off by asking people that are kind enough to give us their time and attend these podcasts and participate. If you could go back in time and give your younger self some words of wisdom, what would they be?
The first thing I'd have said to myself is make sure you keep your hair when you're older. I think, and do you mean this on a personal level, Paul, as opposed to
Not really related to the business. It's just that we some of the stuff that's come out of these podcasts from really clever industry people is really quite insightful, and it carries, some of the lessons we all learn. I'm an old codger in the industry, but I just think it's really valuable sometimes to just reflect at a high level, even at a personal level. If there was something you could whisper in your ear as a youngster that you would carry as a piece of wisdom. Nice to think about that. That's all.
Yeah. I think for me, then, it's a great question. I think for me, probably it's about risk appetite, which is, I think there are stages in your career, and professionally and otherwise, where you look at the risk profile and you think, is that too big a risk to do something? My experience has been when you take the leap and do that, you realize what the people around you are capable of. So always take the risk. What's the worst that can happen? Actually, Garry and I have worked together for, crikey, 25 years or so across different companies, coincidentally, but we both joined a very small growing company, early 2000s, that we helped grow and take to market and sold for a princely sum. And I think that was, jumping out of a corporate into a very small startup to help build it. Brilliant experience. So I'd advise anybody, it's always worth taking the risk.
Have a go.
Yeah,
Garry?
I concur. Actually, I think the taking the gamble, certainly early on in your career, is never such a bad thing. I guess one of the other things that has kind of occurred to me, certainly over the last since COVID, actually. So whilst COVID had some terrible kind of impacts on people, it also forced me to work from home. So I've been down the bottom of the garden now for the last 5 years. As a result of that, I have had a huge amount more time with my kids than I had done previously, and would have done if I'd have stayed in the same scenario. And I think I've really valued that. So I think if there was something I could kind of whisper into my ear, it's the work-life balance, and is really important. Don't just throw everything into work so you kind of to the exclusion of all else, which I think we've all been guilty of at times.
Yeah.
And your kids are only kids for a short period of time, so make sure that you kind of really value them and cherish them. I must admit, the thought of going back to a 5 days a week in the office, leaving home at 7 a.m. and getting back at 7 p.m. now doesn't hold any value for me at all.
And probably spending 3 hours with no time to think on a train where you can't even sit down, it just doesn't make sense anyway, does it? But yeah, that's really, listen, I'm very grateful. Thank you so much for your time. I really hope our audience can take on board some of the scope of what you guys do, and that they can see, where it can fit for them. But in the meantime, Garry and Adrian, thanks very much for joining, and hopefully look forward to doing a follow-up sometime.
Sounds great.
Brilliant.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much, Paul. I appreciate it.